Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the program this evening. Prof, you are welcome to the program this evening.
Thank you very much, Tunde. It's a pleasure to be here again.
Thank you for being here this evening. I know that here in the UK, the weather has been quite interesting today as they talk about the British weather. We are enjoying summer on our end here.
Ah, in where I am, it's been raining cats and dogs. I probably should put in a few more animals, and that indicates, the effect of changes in weather. There is no climate that is predictable anymore. But I always love it when it rains. I like the sound of raindrops, not falling on my head, but falling falling on the ceiling.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you so much for being here. Um, Prof, there is a lot happening around the world, a lot in Africa, different African countries. We're going to come to those. But let's kick off again with the developing news in Afghanistan. It seems as if what has been feared all the while has now started to materialize with the explosion that's taking place in Kabul airport. How do you react to this piece of news?
Well, it's interesting. I was going to start this program until about 3 hours ago by uh, paying my enormous admiration for the professionalism shown by the armed forces of the different states who have been operating out of Kabul. So it's then rather ironic that even though I am still going to salute the professionalism, I must start by extending my deepest sympathy to the families and friends and colleagues of the American troops and Afghan civilians who, at the tail end of this gigantic operation, had just suffered loss of lives. Um, I extend my deepest sympathy to them. I do congratulate, nevertheless, the armed forces of the several states who had been engaged in the enormous operation. This is the biggest airlift of any population that I'm aware of in the world at any time. The one before this was the Berlin uh, um, lift, airlift. That didn't come close to this at all. And one must pay uh, tribute and acknowledge the professionalism of those men and women from Britain, from United States, from Italy, from Germany, from Turkey, who have made this a successful operation in spite of these casualties, which are just coming. Um, I'm not sure. I must say this with a sense of sorrow that this will be the last. I don't think this will be the last casualties that we are going to see in this operation because obviously the United States. who will be the last to leave. The British are already leaving, Turkey, Germany, they're already leaving. The American troops who will be the last to leave will not leave one American soldier behind at that airport. So, as the last 10, 20, 50 American troops race for that last aircraft, who guarantees their safety? As that last aircraft taxis along the runway, who guarantees the safety of that aircraft? As it takes off, which is the most dangerous part of an aircraft taking off, because it is slow and it is exposed. All the undercarriage is exposed. Who guarantees the safety? Of course, again, I will not prejudge the United States. I bet they've already stationed fast attack aircraft, probably from their bases all around the place, who will now be flying air cover and ready to use infrared light, ultraviolet light, any kind of light that can spot maybe an enemy soldier carrying a missile on his shoulder, moving around the perimeter, and be prepared to fire any shots. So I'm not sure we've seen the last of this. Let me make another preliminary remark. I think the United States or allied forces were fighting three enemies: the Taliban, the Al-Qaeda stroke ISIS-K, and you will be surprised by this, journalists, especially Western journalists, who were always on their neck, prepared to report any negative news. I notice with irritation people at the State Department, people at the Department of Defense, and even the White House, who kept hammering, we lifted 19,000 today. That's the biggest. We lifted 25,000 today. That's the biggest. And yet the journalist wants to harp on, well, they said that there was, somebody being whipped by the Taliban or that kind of thing. Or you will have, well, I don't want to mention her name because she's been in my back book for a long time, since she had this habit of parachuting into any crisis, posturing as if she knew better than the people who've been there for 10, 15 years and then flying out. But she will get decked up in whatever it is, mount, an American Humvee truck, and then go and interview, people who were lining up and this. And as soon as, one Taliban soldier comes running, she will run away. She's probably left Afghanistan by now. They were a pain to the soldiers, and yet they had to be accommodated. I spoke to the son of a friend of mine. We were classmates in the United States. Of course, the dad had retired now. And I was speaking to his son, and I said, why do you tolerate these people? He said, oh, you don't know the power of the press in the US. They will clobber us. So we know they're a nuisance. We know they don't know what they are talking about. We know they are all fighting for who will win some prize in journalism, a Pulitzer Prize or any of the other prizes. That's what and they get in our way. But we dare not criticize them. Even the commander-in-chief cannot criticize them, because journalists would have that last say, we are only doing our job. As if the people you are reporting on are not doing their job. And so I believe that if the drafters of the American Constitution had been known that this is the kind of journalists that the practitioners of politics in America will be faced with, they wouldn't have written into that their constitution the indulgences which they've written for the press. So the press should take part of the blame. Of course, you see, because of the 2020, analytical vision, which they show, by this tonight, they will have started changing their emphasis. Now that what Biden had been afraid of and has been warning everybody of, casualties of the American troops, now that it has happened, the American press will now change its emphasis as if they have made no contribution to this that has happened. Don't get me wrong, because I'm one of those who has criticized Biden for the way and manner in which he has pulled out. But now give the man a break. He warned the whole world that this is likely to happen. Having cleared the undergrowth of all of that, what we are seeing in Afghanistan now is the beginning of another civil war. I don't know whether it's going to take 20, and whether it's a 20-year cycle we are dealing with. The ISIS-K is an enemy of the Taliban. The ISIS-K, one doesn't know its relationship with Al-Qaeda. These are people who ran away from Syria and Iraq to now find, part of them have found a base in Afghanistan, and part of them have now found bases in West Africa, which is the one that I'm scared of. So when the Americans leave, the ISIS-K is going to be launching attacks on the Taliban. Don't also forget that you still have the Northern Alliance, which was an ally of the United States via the CIA, which is still then operating from the north. So this presents the United States with an opportunity. to help the Taliban moderate its excesses. You may be surprised to find me use those words, help the Taliban to moderate its excesses. We all have to simply accept that the US has given up on Afghanistan. It's not going to be able to even lift out all the Afghans who want to leave. But the new Afghan class that it has created in the 20 years it was there, the United States can now turn to the Taliban. Look, in exchange for not rolling back the social and economic progress that we made in 20 years for your own people, especially women, children, we will give you intelligence on the ISIS-K, that is your enemy, that's going to be attacking you. We will help you to negotiate with the Northern Alliance so that your government is a more inclusive one. Now, this is going to be a difficult operation both for the Americans and the Taliban, because the Taliban would like to claim, we won. So what's the need for concessions from our part? There is a need. You have two enemies, three enemies you are battling with: the ISIS-K, the Al-Qaeda, and the Northern Alliance. So the Americans can say, we will help, not to help you fight them, but provide intelligence for you. And if you moderate your activities, we then help you to get access to the funds that will help you for reconstructing of Afghanistan.
Sir, there is a point I want to ask from what you've just said there. So the Taliban has gained a major advantage by now having access to American weapons, now having access to American equipment that they potentially could use against any other threat that is coming at them. So potentially we could say that they're better equipped to fight ISIS-K or whatever other alliance that we have. And that in itself could serve as a deterrent. However, the question I want to put to you, sir, is to what degree would the equipment now in the hand of the Taliban degrade America's counter-terrorism capability?
I don't get the connection between the two, because I don't mean to be rude to the Taliban or anybody, but okay, let me put it in a diplomatic way. If you put me at the controls of a Black Hawk, do you have a functioning Black Hawk? I wouldn't know what button to press. So all this equipment that the Taliban, the American equipment that the Taliban have got their hands of, they need to develop the capability to fly. How long does it take to train a pilot? How long does it take to train a tank officer or a tank technician? When these planes and this equipment start getting degraded and they need to be serviced, who will service them? You may just have inherited junk within 90 days, within 6 months, not just have inherited junk. On the other hand, because I thought where you are going is that this is again a line of negotiation, possibility of a negotiation between the Taliban and the Americans. We want to fight ISIS-K. We want to fight Al-Qaeda. We will leave the Northern Alliance alone. But we want to ensure that these terrorist organizations or revolutionary organizations, whatever you may want to call them, we want to ensure that they don't make Afghanistan a center to export destabilizing terrorism, not particularly to the United States, actually, but to Afghanistan, to Russia, to Iran, to China. Therefore, help us to maintain this equipment and see how we use them so that the United States can then say, all right, in exchange, this and this and these are the things that we want in terms of the acceptability of their behavior. Of course, they could also turn to Russia. Russia will be really happy to get its hands on some of this equipment so that they can learn the state of American military technology in exchange for providing funds or whatever else. China may also be happy to get its hands on some of this equipment again. So in a way, all I'm saying is why we should be looking at possibilities of the United States having some factors to leverage against the Taliban. I don't want to give the impression that the Taliban is completely hopeless or completely at a loss, because there are also enemies of the United States who are just hanging in the wings and looking for opportunities to degrade the power of the United States.
Thank you for that, sir. Now, one of the things we saw in the course of the week was the meeting of the G7 to discuss Afghanistan, to discuss the deadline of 31st of August. And some countries, including the United Kingdom, were hoping that they would be able to convince President Biden to change that date. Are you surprised that he did not change his mind about the date?
No, I'm not surprised. From what has happened now, America actually had intelligence, which I understand it shared with its allies as regards the movement of this ISIS-K. That if it was a question of simply negotiating with the Taliban, they probably could get an extension. But we seem to forget that Afghanistan is one of these countries where the government in Kabul at the center is not in control of vast areas of the country. It is also in control of the warlords. So the Taliban elements in Kabul may not control more than 10, 15 miles outside Kabul. And the United States, through what this means, knew about what these people were planning. And the longer they stay behind, probably at least that was what that was also bothering Biden, that they higher the possibility of these attacks, and that it is the United States that's going to take the brunt and not British soldiers or Italian soldiers or German soldiers. I think that is why he didn't give way. I believe all this negotiation should actually have taken place before that initial withdrawal. Don't forget, all the critics of Biden, none has attacked him, but very few have criticized his decision to leave. He inherited that in any case, but it was the way and manner that decision was carried out. So I believe this G7 meeting should have considered at their last meeting. My information, which I'm sure you are aware of, or those who monitor developments are aware of, was that he actually did tell them he intended to leave in May, and that the British and the Germans said, not possible. There were things that needed to be put in place, but that he refused. So I think that his psychology developed because of the loss of his son and the need for him to develop a profile of being an American president who will end a war, and an American president who will not lose one soldier during his tenure in office, has driven him into taking some of these decisions. Unfortunately, United States forces are all around the world. Some larger than others, but all who could be all subject to attack by any terrorist who is prepared to risk his own life. Even in Germany, in Europe, in the United Kingdom, there is no base, no American base that is 100% secure, provided it's a bomber who is prepared to take his life. So I think that factor has overplayed, Biden's assessment of intelligence that is made available to him.
Thank you, sir. There's a question here on YouTube, and this viewer is asking, wouldn't the open execution of Afghans by the Taliban qualify their top hierarchy for trial at the International Criminal Court of Justice?
Yes, it would, but it will get you nowhere, because when we talk of the Taliban, perhaps analysts have not emphasized sufficiently that you are not talking about a trained army. Look at the soldiers who came into, or don't let me even call them soldiers, are the militiamen who came into Kabul, some of them in sandals. These are people who have walked through the countryside. They haven't been they've been trained to shoot, obviously, but they haven't been trained to be professional soldiers. They were not a disciplined army. It was an assortment of militia owning allegiance, probably to different commanders. So it will be difficult for you before the ICC, the International Criminal Court, to prove that there is a line of communication between the Minister of Defense and that soldier, that militiaman who committed that atrocity. I'm not even sure that the Minister of Defense in Kabul, a Taliban commander in Kabul, controls the Taliban commander in another province. It would take time before you could turn the Taliban into a real professional army. So that really would be the difficulty with that prosecution. And then you have to now factor in that with Americans leaving, is going to get itself caught in a civil war. And there is nothing that degrades discipline in, whether you call it an army or in a militia, than its members suffering losses from, the ISIS-K blowing them up, or the Northern Alliance, taking out their soldiers and that kind of thing. So, no, it will be difficult to mount a successful prosecution. And in any case, who says they will mind? Because the nature of it's an ideology-driven militia, the Taliban, or an ideology-driven army. And the ideology, I'm afraid, is religious. You lose your army in this combat, you go to heaven, and you've been a successful soldier.
Before we leave this topic of Afghanistan for this week, there's a question I want to put to you about Vice President Kamala Harris, who has been she's been to Vietnam this week, talking with the politicians and the leaders there. What is your view on the timing of a visit to Vietnam at the same time that people are saying, hey, you're just losing another major battle after 20 years of war? Why go to Vietnam now? What are your views on that, Prof?
Well, actually, there is no better time to go and reassure your allies as when you've just suffered a setback. A setback that people are interpreting as driven by a desire to avoid commitments in that part of the world. Before I go further, let me address one issue that has bothered me in the way and manner that Vice President Harris' visit has been addressed in the analysis that has been given to it. Journalists have made reference to her lack of experience in foreign policy to demean the trip. And I say this actually shows ignorance of the press about the American system. What was Obama's experience in foreign policy when he became president? George Bush, the son, What was his experience in foreign policy? Clinton was just a governor, and not of a prominent state for that matter. So, and Jimmy Carter, what was his experience? So in a way, to say that she has no experience in foreign affairs and therefore the trip, really the significance of the trip will have to be diminished, to me shows more. Again, this is the tendency of the press to look for something negative to say about any development. Vice President Harris has gone to Southeast Asia to reassure the allies there that America will not succumb to pressure from the Chinese. Put bluntly, because all those territories she's gone to have maritime problems with China. And she's there to tell them, to reassure them that America is not going to cut and run if China increases its threats to them. That's all. Whether it will be successful or not is a different kettle of fish. Whether it will be successful or not will depend on the acts of the United States after the visit. It will not be dependent on what she says or what she doesn't say, but to me, it was a sound strategic decision to send her at this time to go to those countries.
Thank you for that, sir. Let's go to at this point regarding Nigeria. Some weeks back, we talked about almost $1 billion worth of military equipment that the U.S. government had put a hold on, and this was equipment destined for Nigeria. But on Wednesday, we now hear that Nigeria has signed a cooperation agreement with Russia. Is this to spite the United States? And are we likely to see any repercussions from such a deal with Russia?
Mm, this is history repeating itself. During the Nigerian Civil War, there were pressures on the British and the American government not to sell military equipment to the Gawan regime as a means of applying pressure to end the Nigerian Civil War. Nigeria then turned to the Soviet Union, as it was at that time, and signed a military agreement and got equipment, weapons, Air Force planes, and what have you. And that introduced Soviet technology into the Nigerian military arsenal. And I think that there was an understanding on the part of the Western countries that Nigeria really didn't have alternative than to do what it did. Here again now is repeating itself. The same factors dealing with the way and manner the wars, because it's wars in Nigeria, are being fought. And you see, it's taken almost how many years um, almost 30 years, because there is no military chief that wants a multiplicity of technology in his military arsenal. It makes training difficult. As you are sending some people to the Soviet Union to be trained, you are sending to the Americans, you are sending to Britain to be trained, and so on. Military chiefs don't like that. It's taken almost 30 years for the equipment within the Nigerian military to be sanitized. Let's put it that way. And now we are back at again a multiplicity of equipment, so to speak. You know, we discussed again the dichotomy between, well, we've discussed several dichotomies on this program. Dichotomy between democracy and development. And now we have dichotomy between military crisis and human rights. I don't know whether there's anything new that I can say, except to point out that the United States has never been successfully prosecuted, I'm picking my words carefully here, successfully prosecuted for violation of human rights by its troops before an international tribunal, because the United States will simply not allow it. Not that the actions of the troops have been above board in terms of laws of war and humanitarian human rights. This lady, the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, tried under Trump, and America slammed down the International Criminal Court, suspending their rights to travel to the United States, threatening to do this, threatening to do that. Well, she's no longer there now, but the person who replaced her have said that the International Criminal Court has a duty to monitor the activities of. So then it's rather ironic that a country who refuses to expose its troops to human rights profiling is also the one who is usually in Congress accusing other countries of fighting their war and violating human rights, and weapons should not be sold to them. And yet it sells weapons to its allies who are engaged in wars and closes its eyes to how those weapons are used. A good example is the Middle East. And I'm not talking about Israel alone, Saudi Arabia, how those weapons are used, whether internally or in Yemen. So we are playing games. As far as I'm concerned, I would rather see a civil war brought to a rapid end with the victory of one side or the other, and spare civilians the enormous sacrifices which they make through prolonged civil wars.
Let me pick you up on Saudi Arabia that you mentioned there, because we've seen something in the news this week, and this is Iraq trying to be the mediator between Saudi and Iran, and they're now calling for this summit in Baghdad to try to address the ongoing hostility between the two of them. Do you think that's going to come to any good?
Not immediately. Um, you are dealing with centuries old antagonistic relationship due to differences in the ideology underpinnings, their religious affiliation. Um, um, Iran being Shiite and um, Saudi Arabia being Sunni. I think you have to be a scholar in that field or somebody who lives there to understand the intensity of the hostility between those two aspects of the Islamic religion. Maybe you have to go back to the conflict between Protestantism and the Catholic Church in centuries past to understand people killing each other in the name of the same religion. So that's the first thing that will have to be overridden. The second, of course, will be the fact that they support different groups in internal conflicts, whether it's in Yemen or even in Iraq itself. But I think that, and don't forget that Macron, I think, is pledged French support for this summit. And I think there are one or two other countries. I think it's a question of how to manage the development of the Middle East. They are not really sure which way the under Biden, which way American foreign policy is going to swing. The Biden administration is committed to a revisit, and if it could be rescued, the nuclear program of Iran by bringing her back into the agreement that they had, which Trump walked away from. Um, what, what factor would that introduce into the Middle East? Because the Middle East is the region that suffers in a way. We Africans used to have a saying, when the elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. Which is not totally true because the elephants suffer as well. But it's the same thing in the Middle East. All this trouble between Saudi Arabia and Iran, they look for surrogates to fight their wars for them. There's never been a direct war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. There was between Iran and Iraq, but even then, that was a vicarious war between the United States and Iran. So, while I don't expect a successful conference to even get the foreign ministers, if they can get to that level, of Iran and Saudi Arabia sitting across each other on the same table, believe me, it's progress in that part of the world.
Fantastic. Let's go to Rwanda, Prof. And this is looking at the news that Rwanda was going to be taking in some Afghan schoolgirls into the country. And that brings to mind Uganda, that's also been a destination for Afghan refugees. What is your take on Africa being a destination for Afghan refugees?
Okay. Um, these two, first of all, let me say, Africa has not been recognized in the world as the continent that has been most sympathetic to the plight of refugees. There are, I don't know, 15, maybe more, million. If I knew you were going to ask this question, I probably would have checked the number. Maybe about 15 million refugees internally in Africa. And they've been distributed among African countries who haven't asked for any compensation, has not even called on African Union or whatever it is. There is in Africa uh, this positive approach towards refugees. Whenever there is a disturbance in a country across the border, people come flooding in, and then when the problem is over, they go back. And if they don't go back and they stay, all right, they are our brothers and sisters. We are all Africans. And so there is that mentality of being sympathetic towards the plight of others. These two countries you have mentioned have suffered enormously through continuous stretches of civil wars when they have found refuge in neighboring African countries. So I'm not supposed about Kagame and Museveni, um, um, you know, being receptive to giving African refugees home temporarily. Let's mention that this is while they are being processed for onward movement to the United States. It's not that they are going to stay permanently in Uganda or permanently in Rwanda. But if some decide to stay, I'm sure Kagame or Museveni will welcome their permanent stay until they're ready to move on or go back to their country. I'm absolutely sure of that. But I just wish the rest of the world, when they scream, anyway, I just can't understand why the rest of the world will not appreciate the generosity of Africa towards fellow refugees. And now, something that is being extended to other parts of the world. Britain says it will take in 1,000 refugees and 5,000 over the next 5 years. So if you are taking in the refugees because they face extermination in their own countries, the Taliban or ISIS-K or Al-Qaeda will wait 5 years for Britain to gradually take in people that it is determined to execute and exterminate. Does that make sense to you? When what people need is immediate home. We Africans have a positive cultural empathy towards people who suffer. We just have not been recognized for that. And I hope that the Nobel Peace Prize Committee will recognize Africa as a continent, not just an individual, not just a country, but Africa as a continent. for its generosity towards refugees.
Prof, we've had an issue in going on between Algeria and Morocco. Algeria has now cut off diplomatic ties with Morocco. What is your view on what is going on there, Prof?
It's been a long time coming. It started off initially because of the support of Algeria for the Polisario on the West Saharan conflict. And it even extended to the OAU at that time, when the OAU recognized the Polisario Front, which represented Western Sahara, and recognized Western Sahara as an independent country. Morocco walked out of the OAU. During the time I was a foreign minister, I was sent by my president to Morocco to meet King Hassan over the issue. And he did promise that two things. One, in spite of Nigerian recognition of the Polisario, that he will not break relations with Nigeria. And he didn't. And that two, at the appointed time, he would return Morocco to the OAU. And he did. But he expressed bitterness towards Algeria for Algerian support for the Polisario, giving Moroccan support for the Algerian Liberation Front during its during its war of liberation against France. Now, the foreign minister of Algeria at that time was one of the foreign ministers I was very, very close to. He was a lot older than me. So I took him as an uncle. And that's what I always called. I didn't call him my brother, foreign minister, or your excellency. I called him uncle. And he treated me more like, I don't know, whether his son is too, I don't know. But he treated me, in such, we had a close relationship that whenever we assembled for the OAU conference, or any conference, he will call me aside, Bolaji, let us try and work out a common position. Let me know the position you are going to take on any issue, and I will align our own position with you. That's the basis of our African foreign policy. But he also would then complain about Morocco. So I just listened to complaints from either side. So I'm not surprised that Morocco now thinks this is payback time. It's been a long time coming. And has now started recognizing some breakaway groups in Algeria, which is then now a direct challenge, an existential challenge to the territorial integrity of Algeria. Now, Algeria has now added one more on top because of Moroccan involvement in the Abrahamic treaty that the United States under Trump packaged and recognized Israel. There has been cordial relationship between Morocco and Israel from the beginning. Everybody knew that. But now to concretize it and bring it out into the open by now establishing diplomatic relations was too much for Algeria to, accept. I hope it doesn't. I hope it doesn't get to military confrontation between the two, because my experience has been on issues like this is there would usually be a flare up militarily between the two before both sides calm down. It's like they feel, okay, now we've broken our diplomatic relations. What next? Hot heads on both sides will teach them a lesson, teach him a lesson, and so on. And the lesson is usually sacrifices of the lives of young boys who are put in uniform to confront each other across the battle line.
Hmm. Sir, I'm going to crave your indulgence. There are two questions, one from YouTube, and there's a point on Tanzania that I want to put across to you before we close the program this evening. And this question from YouTube is really questioning the foreign policy credentials of President Biden. And the person is asking this: why didn't Biden bring in the G7, Russia, and China, that border Afghanistan, into some sort of multilateral group to oversee the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and even possibly in a sort of post withdrawal role in Afghanistan? How do you respond to that question, sir?
Well, if you recall, as I said, I've tried to avoid saying "I told you so" because this smacks of intellectual arrogance, which I don't like to display. But as soon as you recall, January this year, as soon as Biden said democracy will be the driving force of his foreign policy, I said on this program and on other programs, you are going to antagonize Russia, you are going to antagonize China, two major countries that you need on climate control and war on terrorism. I said so. Of course, I didn't include Afghanistan because I wasn't expecting that Afghanistan would unravel for that quickly. But the direct answer to the questioner is that the relationship with Russia and China, between the United States and Russia stroke China, is so bad that even if he sought their help, because that's what it's going to amount to, in disengaging from Afghanistan, they are not going to offer him that help unless he now promises to stop the embarrassment that the United States causes China and Russia at every international conference. They may learn to regret this, because when terrorists based in Afghanistan now starts either hitting Russia, that still has its own problem with its own Muslims in Chechnya, and China, that has its own problem, with its own its Muslim population, then they may wish that perhaps they'd come together with the United States to arrange for a good withdrawal package that will allow all of them jointly to cooperate in containing terrorism. But governments don't learn, so nobody. Governments don't learn from history. Human beings don't learn from history. We never do. All of us.
All right, Prof. Let's end the program on this note.
Okay.
The president of Tanzania has gotten herself into some really hot water over some comments she made regarding the female football team. Uh, I don't even know if I should read out the comments here, but I know you must have seen those comments and maybe some of the fallout of the comments of the president of Tanzania. Uh, she's called. She's referred to the female football team as having flat chests and the impact that may have on their suitability for marriage in future. Prof, what do you have to say to that?
Well, I'm glad you are the one who read out her words, not me. Um, why do why do why do you want to get me into trouble at the tail end of our program? Look, the president has two audiences. The domestic audience that probably finds nothing wrong with what she has said, and the international audience that are probably more rattled than the Tanzanians themselves. So let's leave the Tanzanians to sort this matter out among themselves and leave us out of it.
All right, we'll do so, sir. Thank you, Prof, for that diplomatic response. I once again, sorry for going a little bit over time today. I wanted to put those two questions to you. And on that note, to our viewers, thank you for being with us throughout the program this week. And we will be back same time next week, 7 p.m. Nigerian time, 7 p.m. UK time, and whatever time that's going to be for you who are in other parts of the world. Thank you for being there this evening. If you haven't subscribed, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you have the notification when we go live again. I'm Prof. Thank you very much. Have a lovely evening.
Wakanda.
Good
Peace.
night, sir. Good night, sir.
Good night.